Hello, my name is Pete Schulte, and I was in the advertising business years and years ago. And there probably aren't too many of us left at our age. It's parallel to World War II veterans, but so we thought we'd do a video of my recollection of the advertising business in New York City, where I was in the early 60s. Now, many of you have seen the TV series Mad Men, and I get asked all the time when asked about my career, what did you do? And I said, well, I was in the advertising business in the early 60s in New York City. And they said, well, that sounds like Mad Men to me. I said, yeah, although we didn't call ourselves Mad Men then. I think the producer of the TV series took some liberty. And called them, that we were called, as I recollect, ad men. And Mad Men means probably Madison Avenue. And that was kind of the overall term to describe that occupation. However, the first agency I worked at was on Fifth Avenue. So back in 1960, after military and college, I was always interested in advertising, and of course New York was the epicenter of the advertising business at that time, and probably still is. And through an acquaintance, it was just happenstance that I was sitting at a bar one night, and a friend of mine from high school said, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I have no idea, but I'm looking around. Said, you ever interested in the advertising business? I said, yeah, I'd be very interested in that. And he said, well, my father's connected. Why don't I set up an interview? And it worked out, and I started. I got a job with, then it was called Ted Bates and Company. And Ted Bates was probably in the top 5 advertising agencies in the world at that time. And most of the guys, and there were mostly men in the training program, started off in the mailroom. And mailroom paid $50 a week. And seems amazing that you could live, especially in New York City in those days, at that wage. But somehow we managed to do it. And I spent 5 years in the advertising business overall. A couple of years at Ted Bates, and then, as many of us did, and they probably still do it, you jump from agency to agency to improve your earnings. And so after Ted Bates, I went to a company called Donahue & Co., which became West Weir and Bartell. And then after that, one more stop, and it was William Esty & Company. And going back to Bates, started in the mailroom, and then they offered you your choices of departments. And the departments in the advertising business at that time were media departments. Media department those are the people who actually place the ads for the advertisers, and they have further breakdown is media department is radio, television, magazines, and newspapers primarily. So I started in the media. So I selected media. A lot of other boys in the mailroom selected the copy department. Those are the people who write and produce the ads. And some of them selected an account exec. Account executives are they represent the agency for specific clients, and they work directly with the clients. So they're the contact people. They have art department and other departments, but so I selected media, and it was a chance to get out of the mailroom real fast and get into the mainstream of the agency. And I wound up specializing in radio, and that was buying radio time from representatives for stations all around the country for my client. And at the time, it was primarily a male industry, and this is going back to the early 60s. But there were some females in prominent positions as media supervisors. And I worked for one, and she was just terrific to work for. We had a great relationship, but the money wasn't that great, and so it was inevitable that you had to move to another agency. So I moved over to this agency, Donahue & Co., and I spent a couple of years there. And then I moved over to a larger agency by the name of William Esty. And William Esty had as their major account R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company. And R.J. Reynolds, as most everyone knows, is the Winston, Salem, and those are their primary brands. And the interesting thing about that is, in those days, most people smoked. In those days, it was acceptable, and I was one of them. And but if you didn't smoke your William Esty's brand of the R.J. Reynolds, you couldn't work there. I mean, so what we had to do was, if we smoked another brand, get an empty package with, let's see, I think it was Winston, and put your cigarettes in the Winston package so they would think you're smoking Winstons, and so that was interesting. So I went over there as primarily buying time on radio stations throughout the country, and finally got to a livable wage. The advertising business was a lot of fun. I think it's the most fun I've had in my career. And when you remember the TV series Mad Men, most of that was true. Most of what, even the R-rated parts of it were true. Drinking was very fashionable in those days. And it was, when you were entertained by a client who was soliciting your business, it was 2 drinks for lunch every time you went out, and perhaps even wine with the lunch, so maybe more. So as you saw in the Mad Men series, yes, it did happen. It happened that way. Extremely competitive business. You could all be working there one day, and all of a sudden the major client would decide to move to another agency, and everybody was just immediately out of a job. Politics was an important part of it, but overall it was a fun business. I eventually moved out and decided to specialize in the radio business, and I started off being a radio representative, so I just switched positions. I was the guy now calling on the advertising agencies, and spent several years as a radio representative in New York and Chicago. And then I was moved back to New York, and then unfortunately it became a casualty in the business, as we used to say, that there was inevitable almost that you're going to get fired, and certainly I was, and it happened 3 times in my life. And so there I was in New York, running this the Eastern division of this company, and I was let go, but fortunately ended up with an offer to actually manage a radio station in Tampa, Florida. So that's where I went, down to Tampa Bay, and I ran radio stations, and did that for many years. That evolved into being a regional supervisor over a cluster of stations. Eventually moved to Houston and ran the Houston stations for this company. And we were acquired by a company called Hart Hanks out of San Antonio, and they were a big media company, radio, TV, and they had a industry publication by the name of Radio and Records. And interestingly enough, one of the people I work with, who was from Radio Records, was Bob Kardashian, who was well, everyone knows who his kids are, and Bob has passed on, but he was, so we worked with him at Radio and Records. That was one of the divisions. And eventually, Hart Hanks decided to get out of radio, and I moved into what we call a merchant banking company in Houston. And merchant banking is just, they tried to acquire companies, and they were interested in setting up a media company. So I did that for a year, and that didn't work out. It wasn't the right time to buy stations. So then I moved on and took a job as a supervisor for a radio chain in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And that only, unfortunately, another casualty, it only lasted a year. I was replaced there. But we decided that one of the chief financial officer of that company and I got together and decided to see if we could purchase the radio group who just terminated me. And so it was kind of a covert operation, but we managed to put it together and get financing out of New York, and we bought the radio company. And so there I was, back in charge, but this time as an owner. And we were able to accomplish something that a lot of people didn't at the time, and that's get full financing and majority ownership without putting any money in. That's called a bootstrap deal, and never happened again. I think we were the last ones. So we held that for 8 years, and then finally sold the radio group to an investment division of General Electric, and it was their, I think it was, I'm trying to think of GE pension fund. I think it was their pension fund division who actually bought it. They held it for a couple of years. They sold it to Clear Channel, and then Clear Channel was acquired by one of these private equity groups, and so that's where they are today. That was my career in radio, but the most fun I had was the advertising agency business, and that was, even though it was, you had the problems of account switches, and the stability certainly wasn't there, it was a lot of fun. So as I watched the Mad Men series, it was kind of an interesting look back into my history, and it was kind of funny to see what transpired. And most of what you saw on that series was actually very true. So, yeah, in fact, it may have been a little bit worse in some cases, but I can't get into that. So.
Pete, what was it like to live in New York at that time?
New York was exciting. Of course, that was my home. And so I was born and raised there and lived in Manhattan, and a very exciting place to be. And it was tough to leave, actually. And if they say if you can make it there, like the song goes, you can make it anywhere, it was actually the place to be. That isn't the case today, I realize that, but then it was, yeah. And the advantage would be that to some of the guys that if they went to an Ivy League school, for instance, they were on an accelerated pace. So I didn't, but anyway, it was a lot of fun.
What was your day like back then? You get up in the morning and what?
You got up at, it was kind of normal. You'd get in anywhere from between 8 and 9. So the hours were pretty reasonable. The advertising business that there weren't that many late nights and so forth. Now, as later on, when you had to entertain clients, you have to take them out to dinner several times a week, so that occupied a lot of your time.
How old were you when you went to your first ad agency?
Ad agency would be 22, 21 or 22, yeah. So.
Pretty heady times.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for 22-year-olds today that want to go in the ad business?
It's hard. I've had college graduates come to me and ask for advice on entry into the advertising field, and I think it's harder than ever, primarily because there probably are not as many agencies today, through a lot of consolidation, and it's I don't know if I would recommend it. It's a risky business at this time. I guess I would I like to think of myself as somewhat of an entrepreneur, and I would probably think about starting my own. Most of these people getting out of school now with marketing degrees, that's probably what I would think that would be a nice career path. To get into an established agency is very, very competitive, so very, very difficult now.
All right, well, thanks.
Okay,
That was great.
my pleasure.